Welcome back, folks. In this short video, I'm going to briefly go back through William's notion of alienation and very briefly explain why Peter Railton thinks that it is maybe not such a big deal. So it's a famous thought experiment that Williams offers in a different essay than the one that you read. So imagine that there exists a person who's been presented with a choice that we're meant to think is a difficult choice. That the choice is supposed to be difficult is very important. So imagine that this person is currently unemployed, and they're in this situation where their life is really challenging because they don't have a job in all the ways that this is sort of obvious to you. But unfortunately, this job offer that they've just gotten, if they were to take it, it would require that they do something that they think is really bad. They would contribute to activities that they think no one should do. Um, the example that Williams gives in his original essay is that the person would take a job as like a weapons designer and they would build bombs or some other kind of technology which is like clearly devoted to doing a thing that some people think should never be done, much less something that no particular person might want to do themselves. But the problem is that they don't take this job. At least at the moment, there's no other job on offer and their family is going to struggle. This is supposed to be a really hard decision for this person, or at least it seems like a hard decision now. Should my family suffer, or should I do something that I think is truly morally objectionable? So, William says that when we think about dilemmas like this, what we're supposed to do is ask ourselves two questions. One sort of superficial question, what should a person do? And then this more complicated question of how should they decide what to do? And for Williams, most moral theories fall apart on question two, even if they seem like they answer question one pretty effectively. So let's think a little bit about question two here. So when we think about how hard this decision is supposed to be, we need to give some kind of an explanation for like why it's hard or in what specific way it's hard. If we imagine that this decision is being made by a utilitarian, it seems like it's going to be possible to do this, but it starts to fall apart if we think about it really closely. So, taking the job that I think is really objectionable, right? The benefit here, obviously, the utilitarian benefit is that my family would be in much better shape. The bad thing is that I'm going to have to do something that I object to. Now, maybe you want to say that the utilitarian needs to go a step further. They need to actually explain what's bad about that. So maybe you think that when you do something that you don't like to do, it causes you stress and different kinds of psychological harm, and the utilitarian definitely recognizes psychological harm as being important. So maybe that's why that's bad. If I don't take the job, then this other obviously bad thing happens, which is that my family suffers and they continue to suffer in whatever way that they're currently suffering. I suffer along with them too. But this good thing is supposed to happen if I don't take the job, which is that my conscience remains clean and whatever psychological harm I get from not having a job, I don't get that specific psychological harm. Um, so maybe this already sounds like a hard decision, but let's make it a little bit harder in a way that the utilitarian is going to find sort of challenging to deal with. Imagine that if I don't take this job, and you don't have to imagine this, right? This is maybe just sort of obvious. Somebody else is going to take the job instead. Now, imagine that the person who's going to take the job, if I don't take it, is different from me in a very important way, in that they really, 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 really are excited to do this job. They're into making bombs or whatever. They're into this idea that they'll get to cause harm. They're really gleeful about it. And in particular, what that means is that if I do the job, I'm going to probably find the safest way to do it, right? I'm going to try to kill as few people as possible. I'm going to make like the most non-lethal weapons I can. But if this person takes the job, they're going to focus on the most dangerous kinds of weapons, or however this job is supposed to go. And so if I take the job, actually the world might be better. And it might be better actually because I hate the job. I'm going to do everything that I can to protect lives. And alternately, if I don't take the job, the world is going to be like tangibly worse because there's not going to be this person with a clear moral compass doing this dangerous and objectionable thing. Now this decision is really, really hard. It's very hard to explain how the bad thing that happens when I take the job, really this bad thing that happens to me primarily, is so bad that it could be possibly bad enough for it to be wrong to take the job. Quite the opposite, really, at least for the utilitarian. It seems like the real hard part of this decision, and at this point it seems like it's a little bit in quotation marks, right, is that uh, I'm worried that I'm going to feel guilty. And it's supposed to be like bad that I feel guilty, the psychological harm of me doing this bad thing. But you might ask yourself some serious questions here about what the nature of guilt is supposed to be like and whether or not this explanation makes any sense. Guilt, at least usually as you mean it, guilt that's felt correctly, is the experience that you have when you know that you've done something wrong. So you feel bad because you've done wrong. But if we look at the way that this decision is happening and the way that the person that's thinking about taking this job is experiencing guilt or imagining their experience of guilt, it seems like they're putting the cart before the horse. How could they feel guilty, or even why should they think they're justified in feeling guilty if ultimately their action leads to the most good? This person is doing something really, really strange. They're worried that they might feel guilty for helping their family and making the world a better place. That doesn't make any sense. And including a preference like this into your utilitarian reasons that doesn't make any sense seems sort of contradictory to utilitarianism. Surely the utilitarian can't count something like the negative experience that you feel if you do something right into the principle of utility, or else really it seems like it would license all kind of really bad behavior just because like a person doesn't want to do the right thing. So surely the utilitarian just has to toss this kind of silly reasoning out, right? Uh, if I have to choose between just doing the right thing and attempting to just do something else in order to avoid the guilt that I would feel for doing the right thing, then I should probably just pony up, go to a therapist, get over this guilt thing, just do what's right. So, if it turns out that I'm the kind of person who has a moral objection to doing something besides what a fundamental principle says that I should do, a principle like the principle of utility, then it might be that these objections that I have to doing these kinds of things which might dirty my hands, these things can like never be reasons in arguments about the right thing to do. These things, these values that I hold near and dear to myself, strangely, I'm never going to be justified in using them in cases like this. And that's a really weird kind of an idea. This seems to be what Williams is suggesting is the deep problem with utilitarianism, is that I can have these values which, from my point of view, are very, very important. But if I look at the role that they might play in my reasoning, they just can't be important at all. I just need to sort of get over these qualms that I have with killing people or causing harm. And if I feel guilty ever for doing them, uh, it doesn't make any sense for me to feel guilty unless that guilt actually contributes to me doing something right, like maximizing happiness. Williams thinks that this is really, really weird. Uh, but for a couple of different reasons, Peter Railton thinks that this is just not as weird as Williams and other people want to make it out to be. Clearly, it's possible for somebody to have like really, really, really misdirected values, or to have built ground projects up which don't just fail to maximize happiness, but do really objectionable things. And so there are lots of cases in which a person's desires, even their very deep desires, might point them towards something morally wrong. And they need to be able to hold those ground projects up for inspection. And how are they going to do that without separating themselves from those values and attempting to engage in some other kind of analysis, right? When someone says, for instance, what should I do with my life? And you say, well, you should do whatever makes you happy. It turns out that this might be like really, really bad advice if you're talking to someone that is considering becoming a serial killer. Well, what would make me really happy is killing everyone I see. You'd want to say, oh, no, 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 don't do that. Killing lots of people is bad. The person that you were just talking to, this budding serial killer, might be suddenly very confused. Why did you tell me to pursue what makes me happy if up next you're just going to hold some other principle above that? Um, Railton thinks it's just really, really obvious that there are going to be cases where we need to alienate ourselves from our own values in order to inspect them. This is true even if our values aren't wrong, because there are cases where actually our values are underdetermined in a way that aren't particularly helpful. There are lots of cases where you want a particular thing, and trying to pursue it directly doesn't work. The big one that Railton talks about is this problem that happens to a person that wants to be happy. You can't jump straight towards happiness, and trying really hard to be happy is often very frustrating. And so instead, sometimes what we're told to do is something else entirely. It's just like, forget about this pursuit of happiness thing for a while. And you may find out that that's the best way to pursue happiness. And there's nothing really contradictory about this. It seems paradoxical, but once you think about it for a second, you can see how it might be the best advice that you could ever give someone. Um, if you have ever played a sport or engaged in some kind of a hobby or an activity that requires a lot of focus, sometimes focusing really single mindedly on winning or doing something perfectly actually turns into a barrier to doing either of those things. And so maybe it seems like silly advice, but it ends up being silly but good advice that, well, just focus on playing the game. Just focus on enjoying what you're doing, and actually, you might find that that's the best path to perfection, the best path to winning. So Railton argues maybe too much alienation is a bad thing, but actually, it might be the case that the moral life and life in general is actually made better by a little bit of alienation. And so William's response to it, Railton claims, is maybe just a little bit too extreme. See you next time.